So the Pentax 77 has a very well-deserved reputation as an almost ideal portrait lens. Ideal in the sense that it's small and doesn't disturb your subjects as much, for example, as the 135 from the Samyang or even the 85 from Pentax would do. It's that ability to photograph with not necessarily stealth, but without disturbing the environment. For the majority of people who aren't professional models, if you point a very large camera at them, it's a lot less pleasant than being photographed with a smaller camera and a smaller lens. The large aperture of the 1.8 does help compared to the 28-105, and that is one of the reasons why you'd actually get this over the 28-105, because the actual sharpness difference isn't so massive. The increased number of elements in the zoom lens and the fact it's a zoom lens means that the bokeh is not quite as nice, and the colours, I didn't find them as nice either. So there is a reason to have a specialised portrait lens such as the 77. The 85 f1.4 from Sigma I have and actually tested alongside this. I've sold it now, so I can't put it in the video, but I did find that the 85 from Sigma was a very good quality lens. This is not the Art series, this is the old HSM, and sharp, not as sharp as, for example, the Samyang, but in a portrait lens, especially wide open, you don't really want it to be that sharp either. The Samyang 135, I love it because it is so sharp. It is just so sharp. I think it's probably the sharpest lens I have, and I have a few. The bokeh, again, is nice, and it's got an APO design as well, so you don't really get much purple fringing, you don't get a lot of the artifacts that you might do with lesser lenses. The 77 was designed for film cameras, obviously, covers a full frame, and does have purple fringing, does have chromatic aberration of lenses that were designed for film, designed for the lower resolution. So on a Pentax K1 sensor, and obviously the light fall off on the edges is more pronounced than a designed digital lens, such as the 85 from Sigma. This lens overall, I think, is probably the best option, especially if you're traveling, because it is smaller. If you're just doing portraits, I hear that the Pentax 85, the very old one, was even better in terms of the bokeh that you can get and also the colours and separation from background. However, they didn't make very many of them, and those that there are still are in short supply, and the prices are, quite frankly, ridiculous for such an old lens. What I would recommend doing is waiting for the upcoming Pentax 85mm lens, hopefully with the weather sealing and so on, and increased sharpness and reduced chromatic aberration for digital sensors. And when that comes, that's going to be really nice to have. In the meantime, and even if you're on a budget, 77 is going to be a good option. If you're on a real budget, 28-105 is going to be fine for the majority of things. The most important thing in your portrait is the subject and the gesture and the lighting and so on, not necessarily the lens, so that's another thing to bear in mind. The choice overall I would make is the 77 just alongside the 28-105, so I have one lens that's going to do the majority of the photography, and then the 77 is a specialized portrait lens that allows me to get the separation from the background, the large amounts of bokeh that it will do. The thing with this lens is that it's small enough to put in your pocket, and that is actually a really big selling point for it. The Samyang 135 I think is actually probably a better lens, and I say that having tested both of them alongside each other. It's definitely sharper, has less artifacts, and it's just such a lovely lens. But it's manual focus, and it's very big, it's very heavy, and it's a pain to work with. If you're just going to photograph with a tripod and so on, then the 135 is definitely worth looking at, especially for the price. But overall, the 77 is a more versatile lens. The other thing that I would suggest to have a look at is the 85 from Sigma, and also the 85 from Pentax if you're so inclined, but the old one I'd recommend waiting. There are two versions of this lens. One is made in Japan, and apparently it's slightly sharper. I've been testing the made in Japan version, and it is very sharp. It actually compares very favourably to the Samyang 135 in the centre. In the corners it's not quite so nice, but the actual sharpness of this lens is very good. I understand that the 85 has a better rendering for portraits, but in terms of versatility and sharpness at almost all distances, the Pentax 77 is a very good option. So I hope this has been a useful look at these different lenses for portraits. As I say, my choice overall is 28-105 and a 77. That's going to be my best bet, but your mileage may vary. Any questions you have, please put them in the comments below, and any suggestions for future videos, please leave them in the comments. Thanks so much.